What the hell did I just get myself into moment? My second job ever was at an air compressor factory. My job was using a hydraulic press to press fit a bearing into a cast aluminum housing. If you kept your foot on the pedal too long, it had enough force to crack the housing and explode the bearing. The press was wide open with zero safety barriers, and you held the housing with your hands while the press did its thing. My first day, I saw several people smoking meth or crack while on break, and a group of 5 or 6 people get into a brawl. I left on my lunch break and never returned.
That sounds like a sketchy job. Working with heavy machinery and no safety measures is risky enough, but seeing people do drugs and fighting on breaks must have been unsettling. It makes sense you'd want to leave after that first day. Sometimes, you just know when a place isn't right for you.
I had been working for a company as a help desk tech for a few years. I got some certs and was looking to progress my career, so I told my boss that I wanted to do the job I was studying for. She was excited to hear I passed my cert and was happy to promote me, as the previous network admin was preparing to retire. While I was acclimating to the role, we got hit with a catastrophic ransomware attack. It was not my fault, but absolutely my problem because I was the only one with any technical skills beyond the help desk. That was a long and tiring engagement, but at least I know what it's like to work 100 hours in a week.
It's interesting how quickly things can change in a job. You prepare for the next step, then suddenly you find yourself in the deep end. The pressure must have been intense, especially being the only one with tech skills. Working 100 hours in a week is no joke. But it sounds like you handled it. Those experiences teach you a lot and push you to grow, even if they're tough in the moment.
Was at a festival, and Robert Randolph was offering for someone to play guitar with him. I don't know how he waved me up, but as I am being escorted up by security, the reality of not knowing how to play guitar hits. This was probably the longest 30 seconds of walking in my life, as I was about to be in front of a few thousand people. I get on stage to some cheers. He places a guitar on me and says, "We're in G. You know what you're doing?" All I can muster is the truth that I know bass, so he quickly pulls the guitar off and finds someone else. Got to watch the rest of the set from backstage, and Mr. Randolph laughed about it after and thanked me for being honest. Apparently people have not been forthcoming and made bigger fools of themselves than I did.
That's pretty wild. It's one thing to be offered a chance like that, but to walk up not knowing how to play must have been nerve-wracking. At least you were honest about it. I guess a lot of people would have just tried to wing it. Watching from backstage must have been cool though. Getting a laugh out of it just shows how chill Robert Randy is. A memorable experience for sure.
I was 16 with my 16-year-old friends, thinking we were cool and invincible. We were drinking, and my friends had on really short skirts. We were hanging out with slightly older bad boys. They took us to a rough part of our town, to a house party of adult men. Not shortly after arriving, they put an adult film on the main big screen TV and tried to talk about the scenes to my friends and I. I never noped out of a situation so fast in my life. Edit, terrible spelling.
That sounds intense. I remember a similar time when I was young and thought I was invincible too. A group of us ended up at a party with older kids, and things got weird pretty quick. I felt really out of place, and it was one of those moments where you realize you're not as cool as you thought. Sometimes you just have to leave before it gets awkward.
When you just start Army basic training. After you finish in processing, you hop on a bus to go meet your drill sergeants that will be there for your stay. This is called Shark Attack. You hop off the bus with duffel bags only to be met with men and women in these funny little hats, also called campaign hats, screaming at me, telling me to hurry up, and why am I going so slow that made me think, WTF, why did I do this to myself?
I remember starting basic training. After all the paperwork, I got on the bus for Shark Attack. Stepping off, I was greeted by drill sergeants in those campaign hats, yelling at me to hurry up. It was overwhelming. I thought, What did I get myself into? Everyone looked a bit stunned, but that chaos set the tone for everything that followed. It was just the beginning of a long journey.
I started college on a Navy ROTC scholarship. During orientation week, we had to do a very mini boot camp, so I missed orientation, meeting people, etc. The school was a big AG school, nowhere near a naval base. We had to report at 4 or 4:30 a.m. in uniform and run around in circles in the parking lot of the ROTC building. Every other lap or so, an upperclassman would order you to climb into the dumpster, face the chicken coops, and yell, "Wake up, you commie chickens." When they decided that you were done with it, you were ordered to climb out and then be rated for the condition of your uniform. It was then that I decided to pay for my own education.
That sounds like quite the initiation. Missing out on orientation to do that mini boot camp must have been tough. Running around at those hours, plus yelling at chickens, really adds a unique twist to starting college. It's interesting how experiences like that shape decisions, like opting to pay for your own education. Definitely a memorable way to kick off your college journey.
About 10 years ago, my then BF and I had moved to a new town for college. We wanted to make friends, and we were social stoners, so we hung out with a mutual friend of our dealer. About 30 minutes into hanging and smoking, my phone rang. At that time, I had a setting to have the flash go off while it rings in case I ever lost it while on silent mode. Dude became paranoid immediately that I was recording him and going to blackmail him for smoking weed. I explained the setting on my phone and was willing to show him I had no photos or videos of him on my device. My BF and one other friend with us backed me up. This guy lost his absolute mind, walked out of my buddy's house screaming obscenities as he left in 5 degrees weather. We were his ride. To this day, we have no idea what happened to the dude or how he got home. We blocked him later that evening. Never saw him again, fortunately. From there on, we were fine with no new friends, LOL.
That's a wild story. It's strange how small misunderstandings can escalate like that. The guy really panicked over a phone setting. It's clear he was already on edge about something. I can see why you and your friends decided to keep your distance. Sometimes, it's just easier to stick with the people you know rather than bring in new faces, especially after a situation like that. Just a weird night overall, I guess.
I was at a mall and ran into an old high school classmate. He shook my hand and asked me to join him and his friends for a meal at McDonald's. While we ate, he started talking about how Jesus Christ saved him and showed him the way, and all the usual stuff you would expect. He was a completely different person than how I remembered him from 10 years prior. Anyway, as we were exiting the mall, he asked me if I could pray with them. I didn't want to be an asshole, so I agreed. Anyway, as we left the mall, we formed a circle, and they started praying, out loud, including for me. This was in the middle of the day, at the busiest place of the 100K city. I just remember thinking to myself, is this real? Anyway, he spent the next few weeks trying to convince me to join him at their religious gatherings, but I refused.
That's an interesting encounter. Running into someone from high school can be surprising, especially when they've changed so much. It's funny how life takes unexpected turns, like being asked to pray in a mall. It's cool that you were polite about it, even if it wasn't your scene. I've had similar situations where friends tried to pull me into their beliefs, and I just nod along. Not my thing, but it's all good.
Getting my first post-college job at AITA Tech right as they were getting investigated for misleading and overcharging students. While interviewing, everyone was really nice and the place was clean and professional. However, it didn't take long for me to start seeing through all the smoke and mirrors. I made cold calls to lines I knew wouldn't answer or were disconnected and collected a decent paycheck for 6 months before getting out of there. I'm shocked it took 6 more years for them to completely shut down.
That sounds like a wild experience. Starting a job right as the place is in trouble must have felt strange. Being in a clean, friendly environment, but knowing things aren't right is a weird mix. Making calls to numbers that wouldn't even pick up is just strange, too. It's surprising they lasted 6 more years before shutting down. At least you got out when you did.
Felt bad for Mormon missionaries, so when they knocked on my door, I went out to listen to them. I have no interest in Mormonism and do not want to convert to any religion, but at the end of them talking to me, got me into their car and drove me to a tabernacle where I got stuck in a room with Mormon women, who then proceeded to try to find me a husband that day. Needless to say, I now do not open doors to any religious nutbags for any reason.
That sounds pretty wild. I guess being polite took an unexpected turn. It's interesting how a simple conversation can lead to situations you never intended to be part of. I can see why you'd steer clear after that. Definitely a unique experience, for sure.
Driving from San Francisco to Denver for an ad hoc road trip before my flight back to Germany, diverting on a Highway 50 at Fallon on a whim, because I saw it on Top Gear once. I literally stood at a rest stop, saw that loneliest road in America sign, and thought, neat, I'ma find that tree full of shoes and just stop at whatever motel's on my way. Alone, at night, with piss-poor cell reception, without any experience doing road trips like this. After an hour or so on that road without any traffic, I asked myself that question. Equals best driving experience of my life.
That sounds like quite the adventure. Driving alone on a quiet road can be pretty freeing. It's interesting how sometimes the best experiences come from spontaneous decisions. I've done something similar, just taking a random turn and seeing where it leads. It's nice to be in that moment, no distractions, just you and the road. The night adds a different vibe too. Glad you found it rewarding.
Took a woman home from the bar. We hooked up and I slept there for the night. Early the next morning, we were woken up by someone knocking on the door. She panicked and told me to hide under the bed. It was her SIL dropping off her kid so she could go run errands. She came back in and told me she was married. I had to leave through the window so the kid didn't see me.
That sounds like a wild morning. Just imagine being in that situation, hiding under the bed while all that was going down. It's definitely a moment you'd remember. I can't believe she didn't mention being married. Sneaking out the window must have felt pretty awkward too. I guess you learn to be more cautious with people you meet at bars after experiences like that.
Was seeing a guy. My profile said no kids. He hid that from me, had a daughter, sweet kid though. My profile also expressed I needed someone who was calm. I deal with anxiety. He was very overwhelming. I wanted to give him a bit of a chance, so I held out a bit longer. The worst was that he had severe anger issues, which didn't show up until 3 weeks in when we were going out on a date, and he basically blew up like a bomb over his ex-wife, and it absolutely terrified me. I had him pull over, I got out of his car, and walked home. Ended that one right there. I had never been so terrified by a man as I had been in that very situation.
It's tough when someone doesn't match what you need. You were clear about wanting no kids and needing calm, yet he hid important things and got overwhelming. That anger must have been shocking, especially on a date. It's good you trusted your instincts and left. Sometimes, walking away is the best choice for your safety and peace of mind. Glad you moved on from that experience.
Guy was getting serious with his quadriplegic. He needs a lot of help with pretty much everything in his daily life, but he can drive quite well with hand controls. We lived in different towns about a 5-hour drive apart. His caregiver was the worst. He packed all his stuff, with help of course, canceled his lease, and drove out to my place to pick me up for a summer road trip, and then to live together after the trip. As we were leaving, I went back inside one last time to check the stove, iron, lights, etc. In the quiet apartment, I thought to myself, well, I'm it now. I was suddenly solely responsible for all his care. This was 14 years ago. I'll never look back. He's the love of my life.
That's a profound story. It captures a moment of commitment and the weight of responsibility. It's impressive how you embraced that challenge and turned it into something positive. Relationships can be complex, especially when health issues are involved, but it seems like you found a meaningful partnership. It's a reminder of how love can really change the course of our lives. Just a solid connection that lasts.
Growing up, I was kind of the chubby, geeky guy who played WoW and went to LAN parties. From 17 to 18, I lost a ton of weight and started getting some attention from women. One of my coworkers who was in her early 20s that I was sort of into invited me over to her place for a small party one evening. Her place was a trailer in a trailer park, not the end of the world. But I go in, and they're just blasting ICP, snorting lines of Coke, a 30 rack of Natty Ice, bottles of Fireball, and smoking blues out of aluminum foil pipes. I knew instantly I wanted to get out of there, but this was a coworker and I didn't want it to be an issue, so I hung out for a while. The coworker was very high and kept trying to get me to go back to her room. So I texted one of our managers I was friends with to call me and asked me to cover a morning shift the following day. He calls me and says, "I need you to come in at 6 a.m. tomorrow," which gave me an excuse to get out of that scene. It was just an instant feeling of, no, I don't want to be here.
That sounds like a wild situation. I can relate to the feeling of being in a place you just don't vibe with. I once went to a friend's party that went sideways fast. Similar scene with substances and loud music. You want to be polite, but sometimes you just have to find a way out. It's all about knowing your limits and not getting caught up in the chaos. Glad you made an exit.
The first day I started teaching high school, these two students, a girl and a guy, started arguing. She was not a small girl, football linebacker build, and she threw a desk chair across the room at him after he called her ugly. I had to jump over my desk and hold her back from beating his ass. Immediately asked myself, what did you agree to?
That sounds intense. It's wild to see students go from words to action so quickly. I would have been thinking about how I ended up in that moment too. It's one of those things that makes you reconsider your career choice real fast. But I guess it's part of the job, dealing with unexpected drama like that. Just a normal day in high school, right?
Kind of my fault, but me and my friend were walking through our town when some religious preachers came up to us and said, "What do you think happens when you die?" As you do. So we replied, like the atheist, that we were something along the lines of nothing, lights out, you know. What preceded was a 30-minute debate with some religious freak about why he was wrong. Everything he said we debunked, then he just repeated it or ignored us. Some of our questions he couldn't answer. I don't know, he did realize we were not going to convert. 15 minutes and I was thinking how the hell we got into this conversation. Eventually we got away.
That sounds familiar. I had a similar experience. A friend and I just wanted some coffee, but we got cornered by someone looking for a debate about life after death. It dragged on endlessly, and no matter what we said, they kept going in circles. I remember just wanting to get back to our drinks. It's funny how some conversations just suck you in unexpectedly. Glad you managed to escape eventually.
When I was in my early 20s dating a man 20 years older than me with kids, and his teenage son keyed my car with the words "slut who sucks an old guy's dick." Among many other issues with his ex and kids. My ex was pretty manipulative and able to smooth talk me into sticking around. And then I was just in too deep and convinced it was my duty to put up with all of it despite being very mistreated and way too young to be taking that kind of thing on. Made me feel sorry for him. Oddly enough, me and that kid ended up being close a few years later, and as me and my ex were splitting up, he apologized. He just didn't know me and was upset about his parents' divorce.
That sounds like a tough situation. It's wild how things can change over time. You end up close with someone who was once a source of conflict. Makes you realize that people react differently to their circumstances. The kid was probably just acting out with his feelings about his family. It's good that you both could move past it and connect later on. Life has a way of surprising you sometimes.
My last job in tech, I went through 5 or 6 rounds of interviews, long time ago, so I forget. I guess the CEO read a book and decided they wanted a change agent, which will probably be on my tombstone. Unfortunately, a few days into the job, I realized this was a company which absolutely refused any change. So I was the absolute worst fit. Unfortunately for me, I was part through an MBA program and could not change jobs. The next 2 years were absolute hell. On a positive note, this led me to change careers.
That sounds like a rough situation. Going through all those interviews and then finding out the company wasn't open to change must have been frustrating. It's good that it ultimately pushed you to switch careers, though. Sometimes a tough experience can lead to better opportunities down the line. It's funny how things work out like that.
A friend was moving away from home and asked me if I'd drive her to the airport. I showed up at her parents' house where she lived, and as she hadn't told them, she was leaving for good. I help her load the car, and she's pulling on one sleeve saying let's go, and her mom is pulling my other sleeve saying where are you taking her? I absolutely thought, how did I end up here?
That sounds pretty awkward. It's surprising how little some people plan for big changes. I can picture you there, stuck in the middle of her mom's confusion and her determination to leave. It must have been a bit tense. You were just trying to help a friend, but getting pulled in both directions like that. Definitely a weird moment. Still, you helped her out, which is what counts.
I applied for a job at a doctor's office, just a simple front desk position, but the guy also on a car show business across the street that he wanted me to work shifts at 2. Okay, no biggie, it's still just a receptionist job. Then, during the interview, he started to grill me on what if the police show up and start asking you questions about me? About my businesses? Do you cooperate with them? No. You'll tell them you can't answer any questions and they can contact my lawyer. I nodded along and thanked him for his time and then politely declined the position. He wasn't about to pay nearly enough for whatever kind of stress came with that role.
That sounds like a sketchy situation. It's wild how some interviews turn into unexpected pressure tests. I had a similar experience once when I applied for a retail job. The manager kept asking me about handling difficult customers in ways that felt over the top. Just like you, I decided to walk away. Sometimes, it's better to trust your instincts and avoid unnecessary drama for a low-paying job.
My first static line jump from a Cessna 182 in Maricopa, Arizona. That was in 1995. I'm a licensed skydiver now. Yes, they just don't let any idiot jump from an airplane. You need to be a licensed idiot. Honestly, skydiving is by far the most fun that I have ever had. My first thought after climbing out and hanging from the strut was, what have I done? Everyone should do it once.
That sounds like quite the experience. Jumping from a plane must have been a mix of fear and excitement. It's interesting how that initial panic turns into adrenaline and pure fun. Being a licensed skydiver now just shows how you embraced it. It's cool that you think everyone should try it at least once. It really does seem like one of those bucket list things.
A couple of years ago, I had recently gotten into trad climbing. I had a fair amount of easy 5.6 to 5.8 routes under my belt and decided to try a harder one. I eventually settled on one that was 5.9 plus, thinking that it would be comfortable still. I was wrong. As I moved up the wall, I saw that a couple of pieces of gear I had placed had come out after I had placed another above them. I suddenly was very uncertain of trusting any of the gear I had placed. I was already 60 feet up the route and decided that I knew I'd be able to trust the anchors that I was almost to. I vividly remembered asking myself, why do I think this is fun? And just generally not having a very good time. I was able to push through to the anchors with a no-falls mindset and then swore off of trying something like that ever again. 20 minutes later, I wasn't able to stop talking about how awesome it was. October 10th.
That sounds intense. It's wild how climbing can shift your perspective like that. In the moment, it feels terrifying, but once it's over, you find yourself reflecting on it fondly. I had a similar experience on a hike once. Thought I was lost and panicked a bit, but once I found my way back, I couldn't stop raving about the views. It's funny how fear can turn into appreciation.
I joined a course to learn programming with zero knowledge of programming. I quit a decent job and then an okay job to do this. I was getting paid a decent salary and benefits while I trained, but nothing if I failed. It was the first time I really believed in myself. But not that first day. That first day, I was terrified.
It's kind of wild to think about taking that leap. Quitting stable jobs to dive into something totally new is risky but brave. I remember feeling the same way when I first tried something outside my comfort zone. The fear in the beginning can be heavy, but pushing through it often leads to growth. Believing in yourself makes a big difference, especially when things get tough. I'm sure you'll figure it out.
I work in a bar. My city closes down early in general, and so does the bar I work in. There's a bar that's about one cigarette up the hill from our bar that is open much later into the morning, so co-workers and I often go there for post-shift drinks. While leaving the post-shift bar and heading back to our own cars, a homeless man jumps out of an alley with 2 homemade spears, literally just sharpened sticks, and throws one on the ground in front of us. I grab it up, and he starts jabbing his spear at me. We got into a little spear sparring match that I was having a good bout of fun with, was also very intoxicated. After a few jabs, the man runs off back down the alley from whence he came. Really didn't hit me until after the fact that either of us could have really hurt the other.
That sounds wild. It's crazy how things can turn out when you're just trying to unwind after a shift. I've had my moments after work too, hanging out with friends, but nothing like a spear fight. Just shows how unpredictable nights can get. At least you can look back and laugh about it now. Just goes to show that you never really know what's waiting around the corner.
Was walking around Dublin with a friend. We were both broke and minors, and a lady and her daughter approached us. They were immigrants and couldn't really speak English, but we kind of understood that they were looking for directions, and since we felt bad for them, we walked with them to try to help them get to wherever they wanted to. At some point, the lady started thanking God for our help and praying for my friend to heal from his broken back. He was just disabled and used a cane to move around. Turns out they thought that we, again, 2 minors, had the money to buy them an entire grocery shop list at a supermarket. At the end of the story, we had to find a way to leave the supermarket without them seeing us. When they already had half the shopping cart filled, loudly crying face, loudly crying face, loudly crying face. I was kind of heartbroken after that, but there's no way we could have paid for them.
That's a tough situation. You try to help, but then you find yourself in a bind. It's a weird feeling when someone puts their hope on you, especially when you just don't have it to give. Walking out of that supermarket must have been awkward. At least you and your friend tried to be good people in a tough spot. Sometimes it's all you can do.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.